welcome you to this panel. That might work or not. There we go. Panel about internet drain. And I think Mark asked me if I wanted to be part of it because I am one of the people that this panel is about. 10 years ago, at this time, actually, I was busy working on my resignation paper to the ISP in Denmark I was working for at that time. They had been really good to me. I'd worked there for 13 years. I'd learned a lot, and I was really, really turned into like a peering internet expert. And then I went off and started working for Netflix because they paid me more. It was a more fun job. Oh, and that was a panel. Bye. So that's kind of apparently what we're seeing not just happening to me, but happen to a lot of the people working at the content side. And that's we're going to try and dive into what is happening there. Is it more than just the money, which it was for my sake? Is there anything we can talk about that will make sure that we have talent working on both sides of that equation? Meaning both at the telco, the local communities, keeping the talent there. They're not all going to California. Well, maybe that is solving itself these days, but that's a different discussion. So, yeah, there's some nice statistics on the slide. You can read that. I want to introduce the panel. So the first thing, that worked. Cool. I'm Nina. I introduced myself and my background, and let's go with the panel. Philip, do you want to tell people who haven't paid attention who you are?
Tell people who I am. Yeah, I'm Philip Smith. I suppose the best thing to say now, independent network consultant. But back over the years, I was part of the UK's first internet service provider, 93 to 97. So that became part of the UUNet empire, or was the WorldCom empire in those days. I spent 13 years at Cisco, doing very much what I'm doing now, helping build internet infrastructure globally. More in developing parts of the internet rather than the developed bit, but I seem to end up back in the developed bit more often than I expected. So, pardon me, a lot of effort going into build the network operations community, network infrastructure. What else to say? Exchange points, transit providers, national networks, you name it. So did that for a while. Couple of years at APNIC, and then I set up on my own. And today doing most of my work is for the Network Startup Resource Center, which is helping with the global R&E infrastructure, and still carrying on very much what I was doing in the Cisco years of helping expand talent and ability and knowledge, I suppose, around the network. And so when Mark and I were just chatting, when we were chatting, probably about 6 months ago. Yeah, that's right, SGNOG Singapore. It was... Yeah, because Mark was asking me, have you noticed? I'm like, are you reading my mind? Because there's, a lot has happened. Well, not even just the last 2-3 years, but I've seen over the last decade. And it's causing me huge concern. And so this panel is actually very timely, very important. None of us are getting any younger. And, people over the years have said, Philip, who's going to be your successor, your replacement? Who's going to be the next BGP tutor, the next exchange point constructor around the region? And I can't point to anybody at all. And that's very disturbing, especially when we see the state of infrastructure right now, which is probably the worst it's been in my experience ever. But anyway, so that's general introduction about where I'm coming from the point of view of this panel.
Thanks. Mark Tinker. I've been in the game since '99, originally in Uganda, all the way through to a bunch of other countries. I did 5 years in Asia Pac in Kuala Lumpur, now with an operator in South Africa, east coast of Africa, called Seacom. And yeah, I mean, just to, to back up what Philip is saying, I am also concerned about the lack of talent or the distribution of talent as it is right now. And, the purpose of this panel is to try and, tease that out.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Edward Lawrence. Similarly, I started off starting a small network in South Africa in about 2004. That network's grown a little bit now across the world, and one of the constraints that we have as we grow is looking for talent. We haven't only noticed this problem in the sort of in the IP space, but also lower down in the infrastructure space. We have a fiber infrastructure company, and it's somewhere that we also struggle with. And yeah, really, Mark also was pinging me about this, and we're trying to sort of work out how we solve this. So yeah, very, very keen, very happy to be on this panel and see how we can unpack it.
Barry Green. I started my network work 1981, military networks. So it's the 80s was military networks, and then going into the 90s, it was the early days of the ISPs, and then going and building the equipment, Cisco, Juniper, open source work. Now I currently on Akamai. If people ask me what I do today, I say I'm more of a resiliency architect, how do you build resilient systems, which goes back to like my military days, how you build resiliency systems that can survive stress of all sorts of physical and natural and network and DOS attacks and things like that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this panel because I have some interesting insights and, put people on the spot with it, because I know I encounter the clue factor is one of our biggest problems right now. I mean, I think I agree with Philip, the fragility of the system we have built and the dynamic forces that's gone into the standards work that make it even more fragile is of a concern, where it's different now versus like 20 years ago, because now that fragility kills people. For 20 years ago, it was like, oh, I couldn't download my web page. So next question.
Cool. Well, thank you. Now you know who we have here, and we have content and operators, sort of, well, not balanced, but we're trying to see if we can have a good debate about this. So I'll pass the intros, and I think I'm going to go with the first question. So that goes for you, Barry. You have to sort of answer for all that side of the industry. Like, why do you? And I think if we elaborate a little bit on that question, is what we've seen is that content, as a general, often have hired mature people who've done all their training or are at the peak of their abilities, and then they take them in and use them, have them work for them, as opposed to taking in juniors and training them themselves. So can you speak a little bit to why that is a strategy that is on that side?
It's not a strategy, it's a dysfunction. So, and I run into this in Akamai. I call it, and the joke I give in Akamai says, oh, this is Akamai brain trust. A lot of times there's this characteristic in the United States with startups in the East Coast versus West Coast, especially up in the Boston area. And people tend not to document what they create and what they do, what they code. Really hard, like go open up a piece of code and open up a script and you go like, okay, what's going on here? You have to reverse engineer it because there's no documentation. There's no write-up with it. You go to the West Coast, go to Silicon Valley, and if you haven't documented it, you can't blitz scale. If you can't blitz scale, then you're not ready to scale up. So you document. You document because you got to write whatever you write. Next week, I got to hire 25 people to come in. You got to train them up really quick. Okay, so this is kind of like the philosophy approach with it. And the content companies, what happens is they start doing up the network. Nobody documents what they're doing, and they have to have senior people to come in there who understand what's going on. Right. And you can't bring the junior people in. So like one of my big mantras being an old timer is I go to everybody I work with, all these people. I think the irony is some of the engineers I work with could be my grandkids. You know, I'm that old with it, right? And I say you have to write up what you're doing in a way where your replacement can understand what you're doing. Write up the process, write up the procedure, write up the script, write up the architecture. So not who replaces you, but who replaces that person. That's how well you want to write up the document. Now, that is me being an early engineer in the United States Air Force, that was the way we documented things in the United States Air Force. Why? Because you can be shot, right? When you get shot, who takes over for you? Right. So it's a philosophy of how you write things up to scale. You got to scale people. We don't have a scale network problem. We have a scale people problem. We've always had a scale people problem. And we don't emphasize this. So the consequences in the content side is that, oh, it's not documented. You need somebody to figure out what the other person did. So you got to hire somebody who's actually done this several times before. And then they come in there and replicate it. They don't document. You hire the next person and they don't document it. So it's an ongoing sort of thing with it, right? So like, for instance, projects I'm working on right now, I'm going through and I'm writing up a tutorial. What is, how do you use communities to manipulate routes in BGP? How do you do this? How do you set up anycast testing architectures? How do you do, and I got to write the tutorial to go along with here's the policy. Right. So because I don't want to do this job 6 months from now. And I think that's the key. A lot of times people, our problem in the content space is to me, it's not about job security that I do the same job over and over again. I'm somebody who gets bored. Right. So I want to document it in such a way that I can hand it off to this person. Right. I'll go work on the next problem then. That's interesting. I'll go work with the next group of people. I like working with people. I learn that way. So you write it up in such a way where you can hand it off. Okay, good, done, next, right? And what's happening is people don't then perpetuate.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. And I wonder, Ben and Mark, do you document more?
So documentation requires knowledge, which requires people. I think one of the big problems we have in Africa is a lack of resources, people resources. A very real example for us, which sort of got me to this panel, was in East Africa. Our head of engineering, decided to move to a content network, which I don't blame her for at all. I think it was the right decision for her career. But she's one of 3 or 4 people in East Africa that we could hire that had serious knowledge, good relationships, understanding of the topology. 3 or 4 people is not a large pool to fish in. And I suppose that the question, we can't, speaking about sort of how we can attract people to stay, it's very hard to compete with that. I mean, this individual and others was offered to relocate to Europe. Schooling for their children, relocation included the husbands and the kids. It was, we can't offer that, and it wouldn't help for that individual to be based in Europe to be managing a network in Africa. It doesn't make sense. So I suppose that there are, how we fix that. There are structural issues. Sure, Africa needs to produce more engineers. There are a lot of orgs doing good work towards that, whether it's ISOC or Afrinic. There's a lot of private orgs working towards that. We try very hard. We have lots of sort of mentorship programs, and we try and take young engineers and build them up as best we can. But that takes time. This particular individual had been in the internet engineering space in East Africa for 15 years, and that's what you need to really have that knowledge. And that knowledge is very hard to replace. So that the replacement part is tricky. The same has just happened to us in West Africa with a different content network. And I suppose the challenge that we have is the messages that we're getting from the content network. So, hey, keep connecting Africa, keep building, keep connecting eyeballs to the network. We need more people connected to the internet, and we will do anything to achieve that. And yet, the most important part of the org, the human resources are being shifted out. So that's the challenge we face. And, I hope we can try and, find solutions towards that, but that's where we're at.
Mark has nothing to say.
No.
No, I mean, I just want to go back and address that question, and I'll come to the documentation piece as well. And even if I think back to 1997 when I was being approached by Cisco to come join, because I was being told Cisco needs clue about how network operators are using the equipment and how should we make the equipment better to better for the internet service providers. So I was, in a little way, I was kind of that talent being moved on into the vendor. But if I fast forward to today, I mean, it's not just the content providers who are lifting. I think Ed touched on that. I think it's really economic migration, but I look around the Asia Pacific region and, I've been working here since 1998 and I've helped coach so many people, get them up to being able to run their network infrastructure. They know all the best practices, they do all the right things and so forth. So they have a huge skill set, which then becomes very attractive to somebody else who entices them away to another country and is back to better opportunities, or maybe it's better education system, or they look at the money that they're going to get and they don't really translate it into the buying power of the local country, but it's just big numbers. So it looks fantastic. And here I am, a Scot, living in Australia, in the Philippines. So I'm not really one to complain about economic migration. I mean, I didn't move for the money. Well, yes, I suppose I did. Joining Cisco was a huge step up from working at Pipex as well. So, I feel bad complaining about people chasing opportunity because I spend all my time encouraging people to chase opportunity, to learn more skills, to become better. I just feel now that it's got to such an extent that the basin that we have left is empty and there's nobody really stepping in to do the replacement. So I don't think it's as narrow as just the content providers. I think it's a much wider thing where, the nonprofit organizations, the big content providers, international orgs, people who are offering better opportunities in countries that potentially are much more stable or apparently more stable, and people are jumping at that. The world is very, the geopolitics at the moment is probably the worst that I remember for a long time, and I don't blame people for upping and heading off somewhere else. But it's how to fill in behind that is the huge question.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, you're right. I think moving always did happen. It always will. But what we had in the past was that there was a trail of people left behind to carry on. And I think the incentive for that was built on the fact that we didn't have all of this automation that we all have now. So, there's a growing breed of engineers coming out of university right now that expect to work in a point-and-click environment. And if they don't find that, it all seems very foreign. So with the next group of engineers that we are seeing coming into the market, targeting going straight to a content provider, and in those environments, they aren't expecting to work with CLI, and that means they probably are less likely to attend a PGP workshop for that sort of reason. So I think movement was always there. It's going to be there, but the lack of interest in picking up the basics with the next generation of engineers is the fundamental issue.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that people in the audience, if you want to comment or you have a question or you have a thought coming out from anything that's being said here, please join us in the conversation. We don't want this to be just a one-way thing. And we will make sure somebody jumps down to you with a microphone. So we move on a little bit. So what I kind of gather here is that, people move on to better jobs, and the worry that is being seen from particularly the operator side is that there is no tail to replace. So what impact does that have on a local community? So say like you have here in the Philippines, the internet community, and people go on. I mean, what is the impact that is seen? I know nobody here is local, but you spoke a little bit to it in Africa. So Philip has a.
Okay, you touched a hot button of mine, totally. I mean, even though I live in Australia, I spend all my life around the region, and what impact it has, it's devastating. That's the only way I'll put it. It's absolutely devastating. So many countries I go to, and, you know, Mark alluded to this, it's the point and click mentality now. If you can't point and click our way to a solution, then it's, oh, the internet's broken, and it's dismissed like that. So, you know, I see many of the ops communities, you know, we had the NOGBOF yesterday and discussing some of that and how NOG should function, and, you know, getting more folks together and so forth. What's happening is a lot of the talent has gone. It has not been replaced, or it's been replaced by very, very junior people. I mean, if I think of, even if I say with my NSRC hat on, think of the campus network design workshops that I've done, teaching R&E administrators of university networks, or even the national research and education network. People get a bit of skill set, they're attracted by the big lights, and off they go. And the people who come in have just graduated with something, you know, I'm not being dismissive deliberately, but they've got this kind of degree thing that's, or whatever, that's basically, I don't know what it's teaching them, because it hasn't taught them the fundamentals of how anything works. And a lot of them are coming, you know, it's great that they're coming to a campus design workshop, but I'm actually really surprised at the complete lack of any kind of knowledge. They're stunned by this sort of flat thing in front of on the desk that's got these push button things. They don't know how to work that. No clue about CLI. What? I've got to type commands on a router? Isn't there something automatic that does this? So there's just this complete shock that we still out doing things. Isn't it modern? You just point and click. You know, they've seen the demonstrations. I mean, GNS3 is a wonderful tool, but people think the internet is built like GNS3. If you want to extend the network somewhere, we just go to a screen and put some more icons and it all magically appears. What does a data center look like? Nobody's any clue. What are these cable things? What are these? And it's spectacular that how this is a lot of what's now being presented at some of these things that we do. And so the documentation issue, nothing is documented. A good network engineer is a very busy network engineer, and the last thing they're going to be doing is sitting in front, writing screeds and screeds of text. I know that's wrong, but unfortunately, there's so few of them, nothing is documented. And so when they move on, there's absolutely nothing left behind. And so, you know, and it's just a complete circle that goes round and round. And I can't just say, oh, it's specific to one country and not another. It's everywhere, all across the Asia-Pacific region.
Interesting. So we have a question. Yay.
My name's Warren Finch. I'm from APNIC. It's sort of an observation as well as a question. When I first started in the industry, education it took years to complete. But with the commercialization of education, it's seen as a money-making exercise. So the courses have gotten shorter, which means that the students are not benefiting from that education. What do you think we can do as an industry to try and convert from a commercialized education system to a sharing is caring type system? And that's what Apricot is. It's a sharing and caring organization, but it's not enough, I think. So what do you think we could do?
I think that's a really good question. Throwing back to the apricot people here, right? Does it, Barry?
Warren, I think you're spot on, because I've been seeing education work. Like when Philip and I were both in Cisco, we're involved with the Cisco Academy, right? That network academy, right? And that was very biased with actualization. In other words, your goal was to get somebody through the training where they get out of the training and they had the confidence they can figure it out and make it happen. It wasn't like what you score on a test. Commercialized is like you score on a test and you get a certificate. And give it an example. I had a major network outage in my core at the mobile operator. I was, kind of in charge of all the network stuff there. And my network engineer, I'm sitting down with them, certifications, gone to school, got a degree, could not get his mind around how Ethernet worked and was tying switches together in a way that you just had a cascade failure of Ethernet. You just broke Ethernet. You couldn't understand why you can't keep on plugging Ethernet into Ethernet into Ethernet into Ethernet, all right? Very basic sort of things from a network engineering standpoint of understanding the protocol. I run into this with inside Akamai. I deal with field engineers who are supposed to be certified, and they do blocks. This block ties to this block to this block. I said, like, okay, fine with the blocks. What's the signal flow? Silence. What's the signal flow? How many people here over the last year have done some signal flow diagrams? Signal flow, do you understand what I'm talking about with signal flow diagram, right? Signal flow diagram is like, okay, follow a waterfall of a signal flow to a TLS connection to somebody on a content. Pick content, Google, Facebook, Akamai, whatever content. Do the signal flow, right? What do you start with? If you don't know what the signal flow is, it fire up Wireshark. Do you know Wireshark? Who here has Wireshark on their laptop right now? Good, right? See, that's right. Those are the sort of things you can take Wireshark that go on there on each stage of that, and you can do, here's the signal flow, boom, 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 what goes on with it, right? It's not about the PowerPoint, right, sort of thing. And those are the sort of skills we miss out. So to me, it's not really the CLI, right? It's that in a DevOps, SecOps world, we have a lot of people in the DevOps, SecOps world that can't understand how to build the things behind it, right? You build in the widget. What does the widget do? The widget makes your life easier, but you got to understand what the widget does, right? And that's what, to me, that's how I articulate the problem. And when I bring in people to interview, I'm finding out, do you understand how the widget is built? Why are you building it for this, right? And then you want to make your life easier because everybody's overloaded, right? But understand the widget, all right? Once the widget is built, it says, okay, automate, click, build the next widget. Because what I'm interested in is, can you build the next widget? And can you build the next widget? Not just click the widget and use the widget. So it's using the widget versus building the widget. That's what I look for when I interview people. And it's tough, can't find them. Just can't find them.
Yeah, so I had a discussion with our HR team, I think at the end of last year, and they were asking what the training plans for my team were, or what the certification requirements were for me to get more people. And I said, well, we don't really have a training requirement per se, and we don't really require certificates for people to join. And she was utterly confused. She's like, so then how do you gauge what the right experience is? Well, you don't know until you interview somebody. And my experience has been over the last 20 years hiring people is that I generally don't tend to hire people with certificates, not because I hate them, but because they put the certificates before their own experience, and that comes out in the interview. It's also been a bit detrimental for our bidding team, because our bidding team gets RFPs from customers that says you need to have 5 MCSEs and 5 CCNPs and 5 that. And we're like, well, I think the team did the certification 3 years ago. It's probably expired. I mean, but what's even funnier now is that some of the RFPs and some of the partners that the vendor partner you're supposed to work with, don't require an actual technical certificate. They require just a certificate from the vendor. So Cisco have this thing, I guess all of them do. It's like a Cisco certified sales engineer type thing. So anybody in the company can actually be Cisco certified in that. And if you have that, then the vendor can partner with you for the customer that they want to build. And I'm like, it really means nothing. I mean, okay, so our pre-sales guy or our marketing people have this, okay, what for? And that's the commercialization of the education. So I still today don't really put a lot of stock in certificates. It's great if you have it, but we'll quickly tell if it doesn't work. I also, to Philip's point, I also don't put a lot of stock in degrees. I personally think the education model as it is now is a little bit dumb, because the information has been democratized to such a degree that you don't really need to be an expert anymore. You just need to be able to know how to ask the right question. Even without ChatGPT, you'll get a decent answer. So I'm looking for curiosity. I'm not looking for expertise, because the answers are already there. You just need to know how to put the questions together. And I would probably, let's say if one of my kids wanted to get into the scheme, I'd probably send them to an apricot, level 1, as opposed to university, for example, because the outcome is what matters, not the process, right? And I don't think today, especially in this field, I don't think you really need a computer science degree or whatever it's called nowadays. I mean, when I started, we don't have those things. I don't think you need that to be in this space. I mean, I don't have one, right? So I think that's, I think that's how we fix it, accepting the fact that the current education model is not really a model in 2023 anymore. And we could probably redirect those funds to something a lot more practical, because the information is out there, right? So.
Go ahead, Bourne.
So you all agree that the current educational system of commercialization is broken. So that's at the university and the older age level. Have we thought about going to a lower age level? So starting at primary school, starting at the level where the interest is, oh, there's a screen. I'm interested in a screen, and start teaching at that point. In a previous life, I was a primary school teacher, and the university I went through, when I did my prac with the primary school, they hadn't touched the computer at all. They had 3 computers in the classroom. I started using them, and this particular university threatened to fail me because I used the computer too much. And this particular university was a university of technology, which was ironic. And so I actually said, we're stopping the conversation there. Anyway, that's another story. But what do you think about the idea of targeting a younger age group and maybe doing something there?
So I think, commercialization of education is a really interesting one. Speaking perhaps, particularly to our vertical, I can't speak as much for other sectors, but to our vertical, I think the interest initially was more to do with mathematics. My father was, fascinated by the concept of transmission of signals, and that came from a mathematical background. He was able to then grow in that field because of his ability to study mathematics at the time. I think that the internet ecosystem has developed or grown to a point, evolved to a point that young people are now inside the ecosystem and are not working on how to build this thing as much anymore. I remember the fact we're playing within widgets as opposed to trying to build widgets, because there are lots of widgets. And that's scary for me, right? Nobody's looking at the underlying topology of it and saying, hey, how are we going to build this thing? How are we going to develop this thing? They're just playing inside the environment, the playground that we're giving them to play in. How can we make that more accessible to young people? Absolutely, I'm for that. But I feel like we've lost that spark where you wanted to try and get hold of your school records on the network. And those are really the people that we look to hire is where are those inquisitive minds? Where is, you know, that passion of saying, hey, how does this all work? And that's, you know, I left school at 14. I don't have a degree yet. Might get one day, but yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So very much agreed. Not sure what the solution is though.
Gavin Tweedy, also in the No Degree Club. I wonder with the curiosity, I know my first involvement in the internet was dial-up. And so you're in a house that didn't have internet. If you wanted to make the internet work, you had to work out how to bring the internet to your house by signing up with someone, paying some money, buying a modem, whatever. But now as a kid gets older, the house has internet. So the way they access the internet is mum or dad plugs a password in on their iPad and it works. So, do any of us think about how the water gets to our house or how the sewage works? It doesn't, because it's already there. You move into the house and it's working. I wonder if that's it, that it's there and working already. So it's not a challenge anymore. And in terms of the brain drain, I was going to say, I think the problem might actually be twofold. So for you, Edward, for example, a lot of us have automated a lot of stuff now. So where we might have had previously 20 engineers doing something, now there's 10. So we're more reliant on a smaller pool. So the people, moving on in their careers is more pronounced. In addition to there obviously being a much larger pool of large cloud providers, OTTs, doing the pilfering. So it's kind of like strip mining versus, taking out a selective few trees. It's a bit more, more noticeable with a smaller pool. So maybe that part of it's also on us, that the automation actually has a detrimental flow on in terms of we're more reliant on a smaller pool.
Adding to what you just mentioned there about attitude. In the education system, all the education system here in the region, APJ region, the region here is very test oriented. So give it a story. When we started at SingNet in '94 in Singapore Telecom, there was supposed to be 300 users in 1 year. On the first day, we had 10,000. So immediately we had scale and we were doing like 10,000, 11,000, 15,000. It was like, it was massive explosion of growth, just a few of us. And HR at Singapore Telecom immediately sent down a couple of college graduates straight out of National University of Singapore. Sorry, since it's recorded National University of Singapore, but send them down there. And then I said, okay, here's what we need to figure out. They're engineers, right? Here's what we need to figure out. Come to the end of the day, they're sitting there in front of the computer. Oh, you didn't tell me what's on the test, was like their answers. They were like frustrated because I didn't show them exactly what to do. It says, you're an engineer and you need to go figure this out. It's a problem. You got to need to figure this out. Get to a point where I was so frustrated with them, and they went to my boss and complained because I wasn't showing them what's on the test. I go like, I have no time. You're an engineer, go figure it out. And I got lucky because I ran into this one engineer, Ghazali Man, I have to say his name, right? That was, every floor had an IT person. And I go in there and I'm waiting for my wife to come out, and Ghazali comes up there. He's so excited. What's going on? Things like this. And hey, I built my own lab about an ISP in the back. I go like, you built your lab? I go in the back and here's this guy running IT on the floor, and he's taken all the junk equipment and he's built a mini ISP in his little lab corner. And so I'm coming out and my wife's secretary goes like, you don't want to mess with him because he's a troublemaker. And so here I am, cultural tuning in. I go, light bulb. Somebody who thinks out of the box, who's hungry to learn, is a troublemaker at Singapore Telecom. So you're a troublemaker if you want to think and be creative and hungry for knowledge in Singapore. Okay, so I call my co-run, Chang Wei Long, and say, we need to find every troublemaker in Singapore Telecom. And that was what saved SingNet from the scaling problem, right? And none of them had a degree. They're all junior officers. They're all frustrated with the job because they kept on wanting to fix things, and bosses says, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And we hired them all, and they just like, they saved the day. They're the ones who saved, the scale and growth with it. No degree. The qualification was hunger and attitude. So what you're saying there is like, and that's one of the things that still today, is this person hungry? Is this person to go out there? It says, I want to go learn it. I'm excited. And what you're mentioning there with it, how does this work? What do I do? Let's go figure it out. You're looking for somebody who's questions, ask.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex from F5. some experience about like getting new engineers into the field and from school. So my background is like engineering on network, but I never been on the internet side, only on like layer 2 for like corporate. And when I joined some company doing like internet networking, I had to learn everything from the ground. So I get lucky to have like mentors who teach me this. But my background as engineer was curiosity. And now when I'm looking for new engineers, what I try to do is like bring a router to the table on a small room and ask some question. And what I'm looking at is like the curiosity of the new engineer. What is this router? What is it for? Is it like high capacity? What do you run on it, etc.? This is what I'm looking. And you were saying like certification. Yes, sometimes it's great because you will get some quite beginning of basics, but you're looking at curiosity. You were talking about documentation. People are lazy. They don't do it. But when somebody is asking you like many times the same question, you will do documentation. You don't want to answer the same question every time. So this is my experience. And the first quality for me is curiosity as engineer.
Exactly. So I mean, to answer your question, yeah, is it already built? It probably is, yes. But the fact of the matter is that the automation at some point will fail, because that's how it is. So, you know, you need to make a plan, because it will go kaput one day. I think coming back to your question, Warren, regarding the, you know, the education at the lower level, completely agree. So one of my neighbors has a 7-year-old boy who has taught himself HTML and can write a website in 5 minutes on an iPad. He's only 7, right? I've had the argument with my wife about whether we homeschool. This was during COVID, because I felt it was a great opportunity to save some money and obviously to watch the kids, but then most importantly, to take them out of the education system that is sort of grooming them to run 8-to-5 jobs, right? On the testing, mainly because of that, because I don't think testing an examination is actually very helpful or very useful. All it does is forces children to cram stuff they don't really understand. So you know, homeschooling is great because then you don't need to test. And if you don't need to test, kids can learn at their own pace with interest, and they can learn the things they are interested in. They don't have to do math if they don't like math. They don't have to do Greek if they don't like Greek. So I think, and the same with my kids as well. I mean, we've seen the stuff that they are interested in, and we allow them to do that at their own pace in their own way. Again, it's a bit tricky because the social status is that you go to school, you make friends, you go to university, etc. So there's a lot of unlearning to do in that respect. But I and a number of my friends agree that the school model is no longer useful in a world where the old information is out there. What's the point of testing if, I mean, there's some schools now that allow open book examinations. And by open book, you're taking an iPad and you see the question, you go, you Google, you answer. What's the point, right? So yeah, I think it needs to change at that level. And to be fair, the current generation of kids have different problems to fix. They don't have the problems we had, but they still have problems nonetheless. So yes, their starting base will be different from ours. They'll have more access, they'll have more information, which is great, but they still need to know how to build the stuff that needs to be built. So I don't think it's a solved problem. It's just a different problem for a different generation, but they still need to be able to fix it when the GUI dies, which it will.
Hi, Jose Santiago, University of Guam. 2 things, but the first one is just a comment. As a university, we have to eat our own dog food, and we can't be hiring people without degrees because we're trying to give people degrees. It's our business. Kind of a catch-22 for us. So maybe a different world for us. Second thing is, I don't know, in 2012, you guys were watching Batman. A very good quote from Bane, one of the villains in Batman, was, I was born in the darkness, you merely adapted it. So my question to you guys is, if you look back at when you're when you first started your career and developed the passions and skills for the industry, are there any problems today that are same as back then? And is that a contributing factor to what's happening now?
Shall I answer Jose's question or rewind? I don't think anything's changed. It's exactly the same as it was. You know, I do have a degree, got two actually, but I've got a PhD in physics, which is absolutely not relevant to anything here at all, apart from proving that I can spend 3 years studying a subject because I was really interested, but it's back to the whole, got to be interested in something. So really interested in something, and I was actually able to write it up. And I think that's put me off documentation for life, to be honest. Because once you've had to write a thesis, and somehow Barry and I wrote a book after that. I don't know how I was conned into that, but anyway. So it was a second documentation. But you know, Jose, I don't think anything has really changed. Everything we've got is just bigger and faster, and the failures are more spectacular when they do. And I don't want to have a go at automation, but I'll have a go at automation. Automation just makes things fall on a much bigger scale, more spectacular, and nobody knows how to fix it. So it's great to automate some things, but not automate them at the expense of getting rid of all your staff, which is what far too many organizations are doing. You've got to know what the tools that you've written are actually up to. And I think we've gone too far. I mean, the pendulum will go back and forth, of course. We've gone too far into automation solves every single thing known. I don't really want to embarrass the transit provider for the conference network, but that's exactly what happened this morning. That's why we had no internet access, because they had an automated tool that should never have ever been used for this infrastructure. And it blocked us because we were actually using the network. Shock, horror. And where were the people running it? I have no idea. You know, and that was really bad, really embarrassing for them. But I don't know. Do they care? I don't think they do care. Well, I'll find out because this is streamed live and is recorded. And that's what I was saying during the break. Dare me to bring this up. But that's exactly the issue. People have thrown all these, everything for the network. Oh, it's a tool. It will just take care of it. And I'm sorry, tools are there to help you. They don't replace you.
I think just to add to that actually real quick is, so I've deliberately, because when I moved to South Africa in 2012, I deliberately slowed down the progress to automation at CCOM. And to be honest, I don't think we do much of it anyway. And the reason for that was very simple, because we wanted to have a team of people that knew how to actually build stuff and knew why, you know, we chose the IGP we chose the architecture we chose and all that stuff. And I think to this day, the most we've done with automation is maybe a sandbox of Ansible somewhere doing a few routine things. But otherwise, most of the stuff is by hand. And the problem obviously is we get a lot of poaching from our team because, you know, there's not a lot of people out there in the market. Like, you know, Ed was saying in East Africa, it's a real nightmare trying to get people. It's the same reason why we also don't use RPSL for route whittling, because it's an automation tool that it's just too heavy. It sounds good, but in real life, it's a real pain. So, you know, our NOC engineers know how to update prefix lists by hand when the customer calls for an update. Because otherwise, if you let RPSL do it, you have a config that big on a router that will never boot. So it's that sort of thing.
Okay, Kendrick Knowles, RNAC. So this is a hard problem, obviously. I don't know. I think one of the issues we have is that I don't think we can answer this, you know, in a room like this, to be honest. And the reason why is because I started my career as a technical trainer. So I took my first CCNA exam when I was 16. I remember the screen saying, because you're under the age of 18, you need parental consent if you're going to get the certification. And I started teaching when I was about 17 years old, CCNA, CCNP stuff, IP addressing. And I discovered a few things. And again, I don't know the answer, but I think I have some thoughts on this. And it has a lot to do with early exposure. We talked about that obviously, and obviously it's about 4 things. Students always ask, how can I really be good at this and, and stay employed and make a good living? And I think it's 4 things, right? It's technical competency. You need to be competent. Character, communication skills, and attitude, right? And I think, of the 4, technical competency is what we kind of can influence here, but the other aspects we really can't, right? So it's a very hard problem, but I think early exposure helps. The earlier you're exposed, and obviously curiosity. You set up a classroom where you have a problem, students come in, and then you just see who asks the right questions, and you kind of could pick it out, right? So the point I'm making is obviously no solution per se, but definitely those 4 things kind of help. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's interesting going back to the sort of the education part. As a kid, I was exposed to lots of different educational systems. And that was really interesting for me. So I was exposed to the French one, where it was just about regurgitating information, learn and regurgitate, but without processing, at least in my experience of it. I was experienced or exposed to the British one, where it was, you do process a little bit, but you just within the lines. And I was exposed to the American one, where I was allowed to speak back to the teacher. I was kicked out of a lot of schools, but I was, in the American one, I spoke back to the teacher and they congratulated me for it. And I was just blown away. I was like, what do you mean? I can argue with somebody in a position of authority? This was a new concept for me. And I enjoyed that system. But there was a really interesting program that was launched in South Africa called, I forgot the name, that was the Code Workshop or something like this. And this used a psychometric test that the French network Free had developed, Xavier Niel, and they licensed his testing model. And they took a bus and they drove around South Africa to all areas, all LSMs, whatever, access to the internet or not. And they just got people into the bus and to pass a psychometric test. And depending on the results of the testing, they then put people into a sort of an intense coding workshop program over a course of a month or 2, where you live on campus and you breathe coding, you sing code, everything you do is coding. And they spit out incredible developers. It's amazing. And this transcended all sort of, whatever, religion, backgrounds, lack thereof, whatever the case it was. It was incredible to see the results that they produced. And maybe that's a change that we need to sort of consider in terms of how we look for people, is more the sort of, what are the psychometric elements that we're looking for and how do we find those people? And how do we bring them to the fore? Going back to the sort of the topic, for me, it's how do we find those replacements? And, East Africa, West Africa, we have the same problem there now. We need resources. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe we need to develop a psychometric test and drive around with buses and test random people in the world and see if they want to come and develop stuff. I'm not sure.
So just riffing off of that, because you asked a question earlier, in your talent problem you have in Africa and the content players, in one way, we can't answer this in this room because we are all here in Apricot. We have all invested to come here, right? So right here, we're frustrated. We're in that community, but we're how do we actually make an impact? So this will be a suggestion for the Apricot community, or maybe for next year. And this has been done in the past, where you actually put in intentionality to drive an agenda, right? And intentionality to drive an agenda is Google has a program to empower. Netflix has a program to empower. Akamai has a program to empower. You talk to all the different players, they have serious money to go in there to develop talent and different agendas to develop talent, right? But it's like diluted in different directions because of whoever's running the program in those organizations. So what Apricot can do is do intentionality. Says, we're going to take a day. We're going to invite all of them to come to Apricot. Take them to a workshop. Here's what's going on. Here's the needs of the region. In other words, you curate basically a one-day session with the intentionality of saying, we want to get them to pay attention to problems here, right? So something, this is me kind of going through and saying, instead of just talking about the problem, let's find something we can actually do. I'm a doer. It's a problem. Got to go find a way to fix it. There's a suggestion to fix it, building on what you just said there with the psychometric test. Right? The money is out there. The organizations are out there. And they say, okay, let's direct it and flow it towards what we know we need.
I mean, so I think the truth of the matter is that we can find the talent and the people who are interested, but who is going to teach them? Because unfortunately, until today, I don't know if it's happened yet, but what the team have learned here in the past week of the workshops isn't being taught in school at any level, primary, secondary, university, it's not being taught. So I come from a stream of engineers who learned from the Philips of the world. And for me, what's very scary is that 20 years later, it's still the Philips of the world, right? And I'm much more lazy than he is, so I stopped teaching, so that's a bit of a problem. But if you go around to the rest of the rooms, it's still the same people 20 years ago that I met, 22, 23 years ago that I met, that are still doing the teaching today. So yes, we get the talent, but who's going to teach them? So I think we need to protect the teachers, right? And I think we need to get, so, my solution, which is what I spoke to Ed about, a couple of weeks ago at lunch, was, if the content players who are taking the talent have some money to put into educating them, but they're putting it in educating them about their own systems post acquisition of the talent and not really reinforcing where it's coming from, we bring them here, but we find a way to get them to support somehow or other a continuous stream of talent that gets taught, right, by whoever Philip decides to give his keys to. And then they do the rest on, and then, right, they come through the ISP, do 10, 15 years, and then content can pick them up and so on and so on and so on. That, I think, is a little bit more sustainable, because the fact is they're not going to go away. They're going to keep coming for talent at the telco, and that's fine. We accept that. But let's also nurture it. I always give the example of Emirates that start training their pilots at 5 years old. That's when they recruit them, which makes a lot of sense because they're hungry for pilots. So I think we need to do the same as well with the content folk and say, guys, we know you're coming for them, so let's work together, right? Because you're not going to teach them the basics, and they need to know the basics because the GUI will fail. And so let's do that. We use them for a little bit, you take them, we continue. But we need to protect the teachers, because there's no teachers right now in formal education teaching what Philip teaches. And unfortunately, I think for the foreseeable future, Juniper, Cisco, Huawei, Mikrotik, Nokia, take your pick, aren't going to be pushing out GUI-based routers anytime soon. Fundamentally, there'll still be CLI, they'll still be written like that, and we need to support them. So yeah, I think that's my take on a potential solution.
Well, I think you need to look at, I think it's a good idea, and I think you can build on it, but just by looking at what you do here. Like right now, we have this lovely coffee bar outside, sponsored by one of the big content who've been employing a lot of the engineers. And I mean, they give us free coffee for this conference. That's great. But I'm sure they would love to spend the money on supporting the workshop last week instead. If it would give them kind of the same exposure. And maybe that would be worth more for this community than nice coffee, because the other coffee is actually quite nice too, for a change. Yeah. So yeah, we have our lineup.
Hello, I'm Ivan from previously from Eastern Telecoms, and now recently joined Rahi Globals. The discussion boils down to today issues on the education, and then of course from staffing. But what can you advise to me as a new or beginner supervisor to handle such concerns wherein they were already hired before me, the staff?
Well, I think Mark at least has covered before, but it's the most important bit for me, thinking through all the training over the years and all the providers I've been to, the most successful network folks are the ones who are curious. And what a supervisor needs to do is encourage the curiosity. And there's so many organizations I've been to where if an employee asks questions, they're seen as a bad person. And I've seen that far too often. That's got to stop. Totally got to stop. The manager, the supervisor has got to encourage the employee to ask questions. You know, we're sitting next door for the last 3 days. How many questions have we had from the audience? Almost nothing. So why are there no questions? Are we all fast asleep? People afraid to lose face? That's a big issue in the region, but why worry about that? You're asking a question. The presenter may not even know the answer. You know, why worry? You know, the presenter may lose face. That doesn't matter. So we need to encourage the curiosity in people to do stuff. You know, I almost didn't do my degree because I was really fascinated by this weird IP thing that the university had on sitting on top of X25. And I spent as much time playing with that than I did doing the main thing. My supervisor wasn't very happy. But I managed to do both. And then even doing the postdoc, most of my time was spent building the network for the department I was in. Again, it was a curiosity thing. And so certainly through all my time at Cisco and so forth, there's always find the curious people and give them more and more to be curious about. And I think that's my big message to any network operator, in your case too, find the folks who are really curious about how stuff works and encourage them, really encourage them to follow that through, because they will discover, they'll discover the new ways of doing things. You know, a manager is not going to discover new ways of things because they're there to do the human resources and make sure the staff get paid and all the rest. It's going to come from the folks who are typing on the keyboards or pointing and clicking on screens and so forth. So that's what I would suggest as a take back for you.
So leading a technical team. So here's 2 pieces of advice. There's a book to get and read, download, whatever, called The Alliance by Reid Hoffman. Okay, so The Alliance. If you don't remember it, go to my Senki site. There's a list of books and it's on that book in there. It was written for supervisors to understand how to take technical talent and to bring them in, and you sit down with them and you say, here's work a relationship with them. Here's your 2-year plan. Here's your 3-year plan. And then when you sit down with them, and this is always radical. This is my dad, who was out of HR. He said, when you sit down for a performance review, the first thing you have them give you for the performance review is the updated copy of their resume. Okay. Don't look at the company performance review you have. Don't look at that. First thing you do is you look at the resume and you say to your staff, what value have we added over this past year? Now, there's been some places like when I had to flip with Paul Vixie of ISC, we had 60 engineers and I had them do this. And they were all going like, this is dangerous. I go, why? He says, because we can walk out the door. I said, exactly. My job as a technical leader is to make sure that every year you're adding value to yourself, because you're adding value to yourself, you're adding value to the company. Now you combine that with the Alliance, and Alliance says, you go through 2 years, here's the goal. Then at the 2-year point or the 3-year point, then there's 2 paths. Path number 1 is we're going to move you to a new role to learn new things, right? So let's not get you stale. And that's tough in a lot of companies. A lot of companies, they don't like this. Akamai does not like this. Google does not like this. A lot of companies don't like this, but this is how you keep them on. And if the company doesn't like it, then your goal then is says, okay, we're going to find where's the next thing you want to go. Well, I want to go explore another company. Okay, I'm going to help you. Now that's radical. You're helping your employee move to another company, right? Now, what you find out in the Alliance, and this is one of the magic, because it's talking about how the Silicon Valley system works, is then that person, they go out there and do it to another 2-year gig. And then they do another 2-year gig. And then all of a sudden you hire them back. Because you see it in here, the community here. Because it's all about the human network, right? So the alliance is about you as a supervisor. How do you embody that? So you think of it, once you go from you're a individual report to a supervisor, it's key about how you can pull talent together. And then when you actually set up a empowered exit, when they go to another place, guess what? Hey, I need to hire somebody. They're over there and say, hey, I know somebody here. I'll send them over to you. Right? Because you have a relationship. Instead of going like, oh man, why'd you leaving? Whack, whack, whack. Why are you leaving? No. Instead, you kind of empower them, right? And then they become like a lot of the hires, recommendations I get from my friends. I help get another job, right? So that's some advice with it. It goes along with it, that empowering relationship with it to encourage that sort of work. Yeah.
So I want to follow on from that because this is good advice as well. I mean, it might help you also. So many times I see is we have a talented network engineer working in an organization, but they're at this level in the company hierarchy. So they want to move on. They may be trying to find a promotion or anything. And the only option they have is administration. There is no career path for any of the network people. So what they end up doing is they end up leaving the organization or they look opportunities elsewhere. I should have mentioned this at the start. This has been one of the most frustrating ones I've seen in the whole of the Asia Pacific region. Folks now, I mean, becoming apricots since 1998, some of the early workshops I've done, where are all these people? They're all like C-STAROs or head of administration or CFOs or politicians. They're not involved in the network infrastructure anymore. And usually the answer is no career path, absolutely no career path whatsoever. If you get promotion, you become a manager. If you become a manager, you're suddenly no longer involved in the network. You're supervising people, your password's taken away, and basically your knowledge of the network is taken away. So, my call also, apart from despairing about the talent drain, is, for goodness sake, the network operators in this region, find a career path for your talent. It's so important to do that because it is very absent here. In Europe, it's different. North America, it's different. But here, I have no idea.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shaoyi and I'm from Singapore. So I just wanted to say a few words with regards to this talent drain and the inability or maybe to attract all these network engineers. I think maybe one of it is also because when seen from the job seekers' perspective, it's no longer that exciting. It's not very sexy and it doesn't pay very well. That's the very important point. I mean, if you cannot even pay somebody, at least in the ISP industry in Singapore, you may not really pay very well. You don't get very good sleep. You stay up late at night doing maintenances, and you get called in the middle of the night for something that's broken, and you have to fix it. Not something I like. Even my boss asked me, "Hey, why do you carry a laptop to conferences? Just an iPad will do." Hey, boss, I'm doing some serious work. I need access to a proper keyboard. So that's why you see, people want to go for internships in Google, Facebook, Meta, and so on. But nobody says that I want to go to an internship in Singtel or in StarHub. It's just horrible. You have TikTok videos saying, hey, look at this. This is my life in Google. I have I think you know what I'm driving at. You have your massage and no free food and so on. You just don't see this at the ISP level. It's just crazy. So it's very hard to really find people. Even some of our best engineers, when that time I was in 1996 in Pacific Internet, this network engineer graduated with chemical engineering. He is not even in this industry, never touched anything IT at all, just like to play games. But he turned out to be the best network engineer that we have in Pacific Internet. So I guess this is really a comment. I don't really know how we can make this job look more sexy or anything in the future. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
That's actually a good segue into my concept here. So going back to the concept of commercialization of education is bad. What about the other concept is that why don't we treat this as a marketing campaign? Look at the supply demand. That's what it is at the moment, isn't it? Supply and demand. We've got a demand, but there's no supply. Flip that on the side where we actually targeted the younger generation. Look at how toys are sold. They create a want. Maybe we target the children with some mechanism, the TikTok video that could be potentially appropriate, and get them talking about the careers at a younger age. If you think about when you were younger, what sort of careers did you know about? There was nothing to do with internet. And when you go to university, do they talk about internet? They do, but you don't know what the jobs are. Whereas we need to make that more visible, maybe at a younger age. And so that way, when children are aspiring to, what will you be when you grow up? Internet engineer or something like that. I'm just being the devil's advocate. What do you think of those ideas?
Thanks. Yeah, perhaps the problems are slightly different in APAC and Africa. I'm looking at this from an African perspective. I don't know as much about the APAC region. It sounds like, at least in Africa, we're trying to fill the funnel, right? We're very much at the early stages of that funnel, and we need to fill it. And there's a lack of volume coming through. And we're happy to offer massages and free food in Africa, by the way, if that's the key. We can even take TikTok videos, I think. But you know, the sort of, I suppose the other part of them is then the adoption into the market, and that's where we're not struggling. We have a lot of opportunities there, and it sounds, at least from what you're saying, Philip, that there's lack of retention or adoption into the markets here. So perhaps different stages of the way that I'm looking at it, at least.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussions from the panel. I'm Fred Christopher from the Pacific Islands. So I see very little representation here of the Pacific. But Philip has been to the Pacific Islands, and I'm sure some of his points and experience also stem out from the Pacific. As you know, the Pacific is a very isolated economies, and they have lack of scale of economy, and the resources are very hard to get. So maybe heading to the topic is talent drain and gain is quite important for us. So once we gain a talent, it becomes very important to keep that talent, because once you lose them, you probably have no one else in the island to do the job. So you end up relying overseas, or there's a huge replacement cost to gain another one. So just for my contribution, perhaps an area that we can do some thinking along the lines of research and development. This is an area that we want to move out as a means to satisfy the curiosity, manage talents, and also retention and career path. So many of the engineers don't see career path for small islands. And that's the reason probably why they shift to larger economies. So the idea about having a R&D could be kind of very complementary, because one of the national or compassion of small island people, small islands population, is to be able to contribute back to the community. So they love to discover things that they will help the community, help come out from their disadvantages and you know, geographically restrictions. So building an R&D with some kind of mentoring or supervision, something that we really like to develop for the Pacific Islands. And of course, you know, we can build up a schedule of topics and gives empowerment amongst the people of the Pacific, because there are a lot of people that are in the Pacific who probably have moved out. This is something that they can also continue to contribute to the Pacific Islands, even though they're in Washington, in US or in Australia. So this is something that we want to build up. So we really like to do that. I think Philip has put up his hands. He wants to be one of the mentoring person, and of course we really appreciate that. given his experience and the degrees and and the experience that he had. So it's just an idea and something that we want to follow up. In fact, with our grouping in the Pacific, this is something we want to develop, and we'll be inviting people like you guys and around the audience, see how much we can add up to this R&D nature, or as a side thing, apart from keeping your job. And this thing will actually build up your company, build up yourself as well, and adding value to your country. Thank you very much.
I hope you push on because I know both Philip and I have taught within the Pacific Islands and those environments with it. We did ISP workshops where the UNDP put money to bring engineers over to different training work with it. But one of the things I think with any program to do is to what like Philip pointed out and others like to ask the questions. So I give an example. This is in the region here, you have to like handhold people through. So I give an example. I'm in Indonesia. We successfully turned around the mobile company. The boss wants to say we're going to go 4G, but we have no RFP. We have to build a plan. We have to build an RFP plan. So we take I took my entire engineering team, about 25 people. We went off site and we sat down in this big conference room like this. And I said, okay, and I gave an example, says, this is what I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on this part. I got online and says, okay, let me find out engineers who know this topic in 4G at Sprint and Vodafone and, other places. Here they are on LinkedIn. So I'm showing on LinkedIn. And I type in the question. I send them a question. Then we went out and had dinner. By the time we came back from dinner, I had answers coming back from LinkedIn. Now, these are people I don't even know. I just did the keyword search for the technology protocol, found the person, asked the question. I'm in Indonesia, I need some help. We're looking at this, and, would you be willing to get on a Skype call? Right? Sent out 4 different people. 2 of them responded right away. By that night, we're on a conference call. I put on a conference bridge and I'm starting to ask the person a question. Right? Immediately they want to help. This is somebody other side of the planet. I'm sitting in, outside of Jakarta, right? And the team's going like, wow, this really works. I says, okay, got it. After that call, took notes down, says, okay, I want everybody here doing the same thing. It's really tough for them to do that jump, to ask, right? This is a community here, right? All of us, we help each other out, right? Remember when we were building the night when we were having a pizza party in Kenya, doing the Kenya Internet Exchange, right? We basically built the Kenya Internet Exchange. We had a conference during the day and we all sat around at night and we basically had to rebuild the entire Kenya backbone. All the backbones need to be rebuilt that night. All the competitors, everybody's there. There's like 8 ISPs sitting in a room. They're all sitting around eating pizza, opening laptops, things like that. And they're going like, and of course they're saying, oh, we don't know all this stuff, but they're teaching me all these wild things of how they're keeping the internet alive in Kenya. And I'm going like, wow, this is fantastic. And I go like, and we call up, there's an IETF going on up in Europe, and we call up the people up in Europe, right? And we're corresponding with them on chat, and they're doing the same thing in Europe. People sitting around building exchange points, sitting on laptops, eating pizza, right? This sort of dialogue, we help each other out, but you have to ask and you have to get through that. So to the question of the gentleman who was asking about how do I help my technical staff, that's one of the key things. You encourage them to go out there and ask, because people will help. You call me up, I help. Call anybody else up on stage. You call us up, hey, I need help on this protocol, this network, or here's what's going on. Guess what? We help.
Just a follow-up, maybe question or, but first I will thank the panelists for having said the ideas for me to handle my colleagues. But with regards to you've mentioned about the career path. So what I am not to ask, but what should be Apricot can contribute on this with regards to have specifically a sessions for career path discussion, something like that. Is it possible for the Apricot to have it on the next sessions, like something like because in the Philippines, we do have course the electronics and communication engineering, wherein they are too broad, and then for the specific for me, for you to have a specific career that you are eyeing after you graduate, you will just take an elective, which is a very short courses, just what you are mentioning. So for me, I think this venue is more on the apricot is sorry, how can I say that? The apricot can and suggest any sessions or any webinars that pertains to more on career path discussions.
I mean, it's a hard one. I mean, I've because of all the countries I've visited in the region over the years, and I've had discussions with HR departments, CEOs, and so forth, even government departments, about trying to make, pointing out the criticality of this role, because the internet's got to be reliable. It's we can't live without it. We need all this and this, but all the conversations I've had about, look, you've got to value the network folks, you've got to value the people who know how this stuff works and how it all fits together. And, we could do that session at Apricot, but frankly, I don't think it's going to make any difference. It's a much bigger attitude change that is needed. And I really don't know where to suggest. What I don't want to do is seen as some outsider walking in, telling a company how to do stuff. That's just a huge barrier, because they'll just, oh, no. It's just some outsider. We don't want to be the outsider walking in, telling how to do things. Organizations need to realize, and I don't think we've reached a point yet where the crunch has come, where infrastructure is going to fail dramatically. And this is certainly when Mark and I were talking about this a few months ago. We haven't reached that point yet, but we've had some big global crunches where it's a warning about what can potentially happen. And I think really when a major operator gets to a position where something is down, it affects a country and nobody knows how to fix it for a reasonable length of time. I think that'll be only the time that we will actually pay attention. We pay attention when a disaster happens. We're really bad at trying to preempt disaster. And this panel, at least in my view, hopefully will make organizations wake up and realize you've got to try and preempt some of these things. Fred Christopher made some good points. The Pacific Islands are bellwethers in so many things. The global climate change is affecting them way more than most other places apart from the Himalayas. But as Fred said, any Pacific Island nation, they lose one person, they've lost the network engineer who can keep the country connected. It's that critical there. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of it. Fred and I, how long have we been doing PACNOD now? 2003. And we look at the people who were there at the start, where they are now: New Zealand, Australia, US, and who's come into replace. It's a fraction of what we had at the beginning, and it's how to handle that. So they're very, very conscious, more so. And this, we have the discussion, as Fred mentioned here. How do we bring these on? So pay very close attention to the Pacific, as the rest of the world is paying very close attention to the Pacific, from the climate change point of view.
So here's how you do it, to your question about convincing your HR and executive management. You need to get the message to them. So you have vendors coming in. Cisco walks in, you talk to the account manager and says, we are going to change our technical plan. Our HR department needs how you guys have your career path. Can you give us the career path document? Because they have a career path document. Juniper comes in, asks the same thing. Google comes in, hey, I need more colo space. Hey, can I get the career plan or that you hand out to your employees for Google? Hey, Facebook, I want to do more Facebook caching. Hey, can I get this? You ask every single one of them, and you basically sit down with your HR department and says, here are examples, because the HR department and your executives need examples of how others are doing it. Because when you look at this from a business leader standpoint, when somebody of talent leaves the company, it's really expensive. Their interests, why you may be as a supervisor with the alliance and help somebody move, they don't want them to move, right? But yet you have this traditional colonialist way, to be honest, a traditional colonialist way of hierarchy that's in the way. And so you get the examples. So in other words, if you say it should change, they don't understand. But if you say, here are 7 different companies and 7 different models, right? Then they go like, okay, here's different models. Okay, what should we do to what your company, which will be different when I did the same thing in Indonesia, right? It will be slightly different flavor because they'll tune it to the local environment. But we did it down in Indonesia with Smartfren and Moratel to keep the engineers there so they don't get poached, right? And you got senior engineers with progression who's been there for 15 years, and they're moving up the ranks, with all the experience and everything because they have a career path. And that's how I did it there. Every vendor that came in there, give me the HR plan, give me the HR plan, handed it at head of HR, right?
Yeah, I think just to, pick up on what both Barry and Philip have said to your question. So, I used to teach with Philip, and, every year he'll ask me to join, and I say, I can't join because I can't take 2 weeks away. And the reason for that is I manage a team of about 12. So my job is to give them protection and cover. Okay. Because the company is trying to eat them. Right. So it's a full-time job, just keeping the noise away so they can be effective. And that's why I can't take 2 weeks off. And there's value in that because, again, with more automation, the higher level executives are seeing less and less need to be paying cost in headcount, right? Because, apparently you can replace 6 people with some device, right? So protecting them so they can focus is key. And, if it actually comes to the cost of you, keeping up with what the network is doing, I think that's actually valuable because they'll be the ones that get up at 3, so you don't have to. But then they're also learning and they get their career path that way. Like I lost somebody to Cloudflare the other day, and it wasn't only a big loss. I encouraged them to actually go because it was a great opportunity. And for me, it was what's the word I'm looking for? It was a success for me because, we managed to get this guy from where he wasn't to where he is, to where he can. And again, it will circle back. I expect him to come back in 15 years, maybe take over from whoever I hand off to type thing. So we had to replace him, and it was a struggle for 6 months trying to get his replacement because I wanted the guy below him to get promoted to his job, which was a great opportunity. But that took 6 months to negotiate with the HR, to the point where he almost left. But, we dug our heels in. It was painful, but he got what he wanted eventually, and he's actually doing the job. And every question I got asked was, can he really do the job? Like, is he qualified? I said, well, what do you mean is he qualified? He's been doing this for 5 years. You're going to bring somebody else in who doesn't know anything about the network, doesn't have the relationships in the company to make things happen just because he's a senior at some other company? So it's that you need to protect your team. If you protect your team and keep the noise away, they will be effective. And then it also gives them the chance to grow. And then you have something in the hands of somebody else if you're not around like I am for this week.
We're at parting comments.
No, go ahead.
All right,
Have a comment?
all right, thanks. Yeah, so we're a wholesaler of IP transit in Africa. So as a result, the development of the market is very important for us. So the more the market develops, the more we grow. So it's the development of the market is aligned to our growth. And as a result, we calculated the other day that we invest probably about 30 to 40% of our senior engineers' time into training others in the community. You know, a couple of our senior engineering team also do training in other regions. One of them was here actually, you know, I suppose the question from my side is it's important for us to develop these internet ecosystems because it is linked to our growth, but it is also linked to the growth of lots of other large organizations, you know, the more support that we can get and the more that we can all build these ecosystems, the better. And I think where that support is put is really, really important. You know, there are large investments made by all the large cloud operators around the world into Africa, and it very much underpins large parts of the internet economies especially in the coastal countries at the moment. But how can we refocus some of that investment into skills development? And that's what it comes down to for me, really, and fill in that funnel. And maybe the answer, and I'm spitballing here, sort of thinking as I'm here, but maybe the answer is to set up sort of focused sort of training centers which are focused on filling the funnel. We'd be happy to contribute towards that. I mean, if we were to put less of our senior network engineers' time into that, there's budget there, right? Whether it's time or monetary. And I'm sure a lot of people would think the same way, to say, how can we set up universities? How can we research in terms of what, you know, how do internet engineers learn? What are the psychometric elements that we want of the people we want to attract? And how can we set up micro training centers, you know, around the world, maybe? Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot there, and there's a huge elephant, but we all need to chip away. And if we don't chip away with it, then we'll never eat it. So,
yeah, I think those were good remarks. So, Barry, you want to go have a final remark as well?
Final remark.
Yeah, we're kind of on time now, so
yeah,
I'm looking
time for lunch. So we're on our way for lunch. Final remark is connected lots of people here, and I think when you go back next week, make a intention and call somebody from here and get on the phone with them. Right, it's easier today because you can WhatsApp name WhatsApp signal, whatever. Just talk, catch up. Say, hey, we didn't get a chance to talk a lot during Apricot. Let's talk now.
Yeah. I can do a final remark, or do you have? No, because thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you very much to the people in the audience. And I think it's a really interesting thing, and I think we've had a lot of different viewpoints on a big issue, and there are a lot of ways we can start doing things. I think the organization here should look at what kind of sponsorships are you offering the sponsors to sort of go in and support the great work you're already doing, and a lot of good advice, in particular to get those HR departments under control. Like, why are you looking to degrees? I mean, why are you sorting out people that could be really good just because they didn't go to school? And again, the need for the community to come together to do some more to supply the funnel, I think, is still out there, and is out there in every region, but here in particular. So let's keep thinking about it and talk about it next time we meet. Next week, when you phone that friend that you met at this conference. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, you